Expected to arrive by Saturday, bringing hundreds of millimeters of rain and winds of around 160 kilometers an hour. The entire country urged to take precautions. Samsung Electronics releases its highly anticipated Galaxy Fold smartphone, an industry first. Samsung says it's fixed the problems that delayed its release earlier this year. And a panel of experts report to the UN Security Council that in the past several months, North Korea has been dodging the sanctions against it with its weapons programs and by importing luxury goods for the regime's leadership. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Typhoon Lingling is fast approaching the Korean peninsula, and by tonight, most of the country will be feeling it. Ling-Ling's expected to be one of the strongest typhoons ever to hit South Korea, bringing strong winds and rain. Lee Min-sun has the latest.
The heavy rain that poured down Thursday over most parts of South Korea has stopped in most areas. But Typhoon Ling-Ling is quickly getting closer, bringing more rain and strong winds. Ling-Ling is a medium-sized typhoon with a maximum wind speed of 145 to 180 kilometers per hour, strong enough to knock down trees. As of this afternoon, it's around 500 kilometers south of Jeju Island. By Saturday morning, it will be west of Jeju and then close to Seoul by the afternoon. Jeju and the waters around it are under a typhoon advisory, and the rest of the country is under a preliminary typhoon warning. Through Saturday, some parts of Jeju will get more than 400 millimeters of rain, while parts of Jeollado province and the west of Chungcheong-namdo province will get over 150 millimeters. Typhoon Ling-Ling is expected to be one of the strongest typhoons South Korea's ever seen, though other storms have caused severe damage before. Typhoon Kompas in 2010 followed a similar route to Ling-Ling, killed 6 people and caused more than $130 million in damage. But Ling-Ling is even closer to the peninsula and has stronger winds. Typhoon Ling-Ling will sweep past South Korea on Saturday and move over North Korea and China on Sunday. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
And with Ling-Ling approaching, our Kan Young-woo takes a look at what you can do to keep you, your family, and your property safe.
The Korea Meteorological Administration says record-breaking winds are on their way to the southern and western islands and coastal areas. As of noon on Friday, the maximum wind speed of Typhoon Ling-Ling was around 160 kilometers an hour, strong enough to flip over cars. To prepare, if you're in the storm's path, you're advised to keep your smartphone close and/or follow the news on the TV or the radio. Stay indoors if possible, but if you have to go out, keep away from construction sites and traffic lights. If you're driving, slow down and do not take roads next to streams or rivers. To keep windows from breaking at your home or business, it can help to put tape on the inside of the frame and sheets of wet newspaper on the glass. Anything that the wind might blow away should be fastened securely. If you live in an area where there might be a landslide or a flood, you should learn the community evacuation plan and how to get to the closest safe house. It's also important to have a first aid kit. The South Korean government is operating the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters 24/7. As of Friday morning, it had raised the typhoon warning one notch from the lowest level attention to caution. Kan Young-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, a report from the UN Security Council says North Korea has continued to violate the sanctions against it by importing luxury goods and selling fishing rights to other countries. Oh Jang-hee has more.
North Korea continues to import luxury goods that it's banned from buying by the UN Security Council. A report released Thursday by the UN Security Council's North Korea Sanctions Committee pointed to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's own private car, in particular a Mercedes Maybach S600. This is the car North Korea took to Vietnam when Kim was there for a summit with U.S. President Donald Trump in February. Vietnam told the UN committee that the North at the time did not provide any details about the car, citing security reasons. Also, the report said more than 100,000 bottles of vodka that were being taken to North Korea several months ago were seized by another UN member country. They were worth 41,000 US dollars in total. The UN committee explained that the North's Taesong department store, which reopened in April after remodeling, is selling various luxury goods and is directly managed by the North's ruling party. Pyongyang is also apparently selling fishing rights to other countries to earn foreign currency. According to the report, fishing boats from other countries have been seen owning or working to obtain fishery rights in North Korean waters. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
And the same UN report suggests that by testing ballistic missiles over the past few months, North Korea has continued to develop its ICBMs. The North's nuclear program continues too. Lee Seung-jae has this report.
The UN Security Council committee that monitors sanctions implementation against North Korea has assessed that North Korea's recent missile tests are designed to support its development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, underscoring the ongoing threat posed by the regime. The panel report covers the February to August period and comes as negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington have stalled since the no-deal summit in Hanoi. In particular, the UN experts noted the significance of recent short-range ballistic missile tests by North Korea, which Trump has dismissed as very standard. According to the UN report, the new class of short-range ballistic missiles launched on May 4th and 9th, as well as two missiles described by the North as a new type technical guided weapon launched on July 24th, are evidence of the regime's ability to master key components of ballistic missile systems. These include solid rocket fuel production, mobility through the use of different types of transporter erector launcher, and the capacity to penetrate ballistic missile defense systems. To further support their case, the UN experts note that regular activity has been observed at ICBM bases close to the northern border. The latest assessment by the UN panel of experts also notes that the North's nuclear program continues to operate despite the absence of nuclear testing and the closure of the Punggye-ri test site. It added that continued operations at the Yeongbyon Uranium Enrichment Facility and the uranium concentration complex and mining sites in Pyeongchang were observed. The rocket launch site located in Dongchanli, which North Korea began to dismantle after the first Kim-Trump summit, also appears to have been restored. Aside from the progress on their weapons program, North Korea has shown progress in its cyber attacks as well. The report indicates North Korea's engagement in multiple cyber attacks on both financial institutions and cryptocurrency exchanges, as well as the mining of cryptocurrency. Such moves allow the North to evade financial sanctions by engaging in theft, which circumvents the ability of UN member states to freeze and prevent the transfer of assets. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, a much overdue and highly anticipated confirmation hearing for Justice Minister nominee Cho Kuk is underway at the National Assembly. There's an intense debate over mounting allegations that Cho and his family invested in suspicious investments in a private equity fund, as well as alleged fraud involving his daughter's college admission. Cho's either denied the allegations or said he was unaware, noting that a prosecutor's probe is underway. At the start of the hearing, he apologized to the people, saying the experience has made him reflect on his past, while at the same time pledging to carry out sweeping reforms if appointed.
My actions have not lined up with my words. While I call for fairness and justice, I didn't realize that the benefits my family has enjoyed might not be fair. I will do my best to clear up these allegations. I think completing the judicial and prosecutorial reform is my duty and a way to give back to the people.
The ruling party is also defending Cho, claiming that he is fit to carry out the administration's reform drive, while the opposition bloc is trying to make the case that Cho's nomination should be scrapped. A two-day hearing was initially scheduled for earlier this week, but was called off because of intense wrangling over whether Cho's family would be present to testify. For Friday's hearing, rival parties agreed to summon 11 witnesses. Those do not include Cho's family. The hearing, however, is ultimately a formality, as his appointment does not require parliamentary approval. The International Olympic Committee said recently that it does not plan to stop Japanese fans next year at the Games in Tokyo from flying the so-called Rising Sun flag, a symbol highly offensive to people throughout Asia whose countries suffered under Japanese imperialism. The IOC so far has said simply that the Olympics should be free of political statements and that the flag itself is not inherently political. Our Kim Bo-kyung takes a closer look at the issue.
To people in China, Korea, and other countries in Asia, the Rising Sun flag was the symbol of the Japanese Empire as it took over their countries in whole or part in the early 20th century. According to Alexis Dutton, a historian in the University of Connecticut, it is both unnecessary and unfortunate to see this flag still used by Japan's self-defense forces, some sports fans, and right-wing political groups. She compared the use of the Rising Sun to the Confederate flag in the U.S., flown by the South in the American Civil War. Like the Rising Sun, she said, the Confederate flag is now discredited not only because that side lost the war, but also because it causes deep pain and suffering to the descendants of the victimized. In her opinion, the IOC should reconsider allowing the Rising Sun flag next summer in Tokyo.
And it really is incumbent on the International Olympic Committee to learn why this hurts so much. I mean, imagine this Los Angeles Stadium Olympics full of American Confederacy flags. That would be terrible.
In fact, the design Japan has chosen for next year's medals at the Paralympics feature elements that strongly resemble the Rising Sun, which Professor Dutton thinks is intentional.
I find it deeply unfortunate that the Paralympic medals will have the Rising Sun flag on them, as you're displaying right now. I think that is a specific political act, and it is up to the International Olympic Committee to recognize that there really is a historical distinction going on here.
To settle the issue, she said it's important to have an international conversation to educate people on how much suffering this flag still causes. Along with that, she said she hopes the South Korean government can navigate the challenges Japan keeps putting in its way, and she urged the South Korean athletes who will be competing in Tokyo to rise above any provocations they encounter there. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is coming back today from a tour of Southeast Asia that took him to Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos. With those countries, he worked to expand cooperation in a range of areas and to drum up support for South Korea in its trade conflict with Japan. Our Park Ki-jun went with the president and files this report.
President Moon Jae-in's ASEAN trip to Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos this week could not have come at a better time as a wider scope of diplomacy is required now more than ever.
Under the situation where the global value chain is being reshuffled due to the U.S.-China trade war and Japan's trade restrictions, ASEAN and India have greater strategic significance as not only a global production base, but a consumer market and direct investment market.
President Moon began his ASEAN trip looking to gather support from Southeast Asian nations regarding the trade dispute with Japan. In an interview with the Bangkok Post prior to the trip, Moon emphasized that Korea and ASEAN need to unite against the spread of trade protectionism. And that was indeed on the table when the president held talks with his counterparts in Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos. According to the presidential advisor for economic affairs, Chu Young-chol, ASEAN countries also want economic advancement through free trade. During the talks, they shared the belief that a fair free trade order needs to be maintained. But there will be competition for Southeast Asian nation support as Japan has already established a large influence in those areas over many years. The presidential advisor says competition and cooperation with Japan will have to coexist if Korea wishes to keep a strong presence in the area. Nonetheless, Korea was successful in securing a wide range of cooperation with the three nations as part of President Moon's efforts to reduce Korea's economic dependence on Japan. Korea and Thailand agreed to increase exchanges in technology related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And while Korea has notified Japan that it will not extend their military intel sharing pact, it signed a similar agreement with Thailand this week, with Seoul and Bangkok agreeing to increase bilateral cooperation in defense and military intelligence. Korea also agreed to jointly develop infrastructure in Myanmar. The two countries are working on a joint industrial complex where Korean companies get easier access to the Myanmar markets in return for their investments. And in Laos, President Moon announced his vision for expanded ties between Korea and the Mekong region, agreeing to help develop infrastructure along the Mekong River. All three nations also reaffirmed their support for the Moon administration's efforts to establish complete denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. President Moon is now the first South Korean leader to visit all 10 ASEAN nations. The partnership he built with the Southeast Asian nations will be foundational when Korea hosts the South Korea-ASEAN Special Summit and the South Korea-Mekong Summit in November this year. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News, Vientiane.
An independent Japanese lawmaker said this week that, in fact, Japanese exporters are to blame for failures to manage Japan's exports, the issue that Tokyo's tried to pin on Korea to justify its new export controls. In other words, the Japanese government is punishing Korean companies for problems that were actually caused by Japanese firms. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
A Japanese lawmaker in the House of Councillors, Hiroyuki Konishi, said this week in posts online and interviews that responsibility for the export curbs on South Korea lies with Japanese firms, not Korean ones. Konishi said that's what he heard twice from the Japanese Trade Ministry, but that contradicts what the ministry said earlier about the trade curbs. In July, Tokyo restricted the export to South Korea of 3 high-tech materials used for making semiconductors, insisting Seoul has failed to properly manage its own controls on shipping strategic goods to North Korea. Konishi, however, said he heard from an official at the Trade Ministry that, in fact, it was certain Japanese exporters that had broken the rules on trade management, and that South Korean companies are not responsible for those infringements according to international trade rules. He went on to say that the Japanese government must fix the violations by those firms and pull back its export controls, criticizing the Abe administration for harming Japan's own industries and causing conflict. Japan has also removed South Korea from a broader whitelist of trusted trading partners. But when it comes to that, Konishi insisted Seoul is to blame for its lax controls on exports to other countries. The Japanese government keeps blaming Seoul, so the lawmaker's remarks highlight the sizable opposition to what the Abe administration is doing. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-wan, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
This week, data showed the first slowdown in American manufacturing in 3 years, and some see that as a possible sign of a broader slowdown. If that were to happen, Korea, with its heavy dependence on other countries, would be affected in a pretty big way, would it not?
Right. Actually, U.S. manufacturing is weakened due to U.S.-China trade war generated dismantle of global value chain. Actually, as we know, Korea is one of the largest victims of U.S.-China trade conflict because Korea's for independence is one of the largest between major economies. So given that situation, Korea's total export is declining over 10 straight months, and particularly its export to China decreases over 20%. So, as you said, Korea will be hugely affected by current situation.
Well, now, America is sort of setting the pace on interest rate cuts for countries around the world. We know the Bank of Korea is watching, so the Federal Reserve at least is staying optimistic about the U.S. What do you think about that?
I believe that overall status of U.S. economy is pretty healthy. Even though U.S. manufacturing is declining, it covers only 19% of total U.S. GDP. The remaining, like 80% of the U.S. GDP is covered by service industry like banks, finance, legal service, and medical service. And that part is still robust. So that was represented by service industrial purchase managers index increased up to 56 from 53. So again, U.S. overall economy is still very robust.
Now, on Friday, the U.S. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell will be giving a speech. What do you think he might have to say?
Actually, in the Jackson Hole Symposium of U.S. Fed in the last month, August, the Chairman Powell was supposed to give the direction of U.S. monetary policy, but he did not clarify the direction of future U.S. monetary policy in the symposium. And then U.S. Federal Reserve is seriously considering the negative impact of U.S.-China trade war on U.S. economy and global economy together. So it is highly expected that U.S. Fed cuts its base interest rate by 0.25% in September's FOMC meeting. So Mr. Powell will give some indicator and information about that interest cut in the near future.
Now, back here in Korea, we saw consumer inflation for the first time. Remarkable. It fell to 0 or maybe lower than that in reality. What's causing that and what can be done about it?
August inflation in Korea against last year's price level was negative 0.4%. So technically speaking, it was the first negative inflation or deflation in history. The largest concern related to that is deflation could be a signal to long-term recession like that of the Japan's long-lasting recession starting from early 1990s. So very general and unanimous, I think, policy package for avoiding long-lasting recession is expansionary policy and expansionary monetary policy, yes.
Well, speaking of expansionary policy, the government plans to spend an extra $2 billion this year to try and revive the economy. But this has some worried, on the other hand, about the state's fiscal soundness. What kind of constraints might the government face, and what generally should we be watching there?
Well, I think expansionary fiscal policy is an appropriate measure to stimulate the economy, first of all. But it should be supported by expansionary monetary policy of more money supply and lower interest rates. And it should be pointed out that we can't continue expansionary policy, fiscal policy and monetary policy forever because of worsening government debt. So while expansionary fiscal policy is effective, we have to enforce the structural reforms, particularly in labor markets and industries.
Got it, Dr. Kim. That's where we'll have to leave it on this Friday. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me today.
Now, after months of delays, Samsung has relaunched its foldable 5G smartphone today in South Korea. The device had been unveiled in April, but early reviews found problems, which Samsung says have been fixed. Our Choi Jung-yoon has more.
Foldable phones are now reality, as Samsung Electronics released its Galaxy Fold 5G on Friday, starting in its home market of South Korea. It's the world's first ever 5G folding phone, with Samsung Electronics managing to launch the product ahead of its rivals, notably Huawei. The Galaxy Fold boasts a 7.3-inch display, which folds into a 4.6-inch screen, allowing consumers to easily hold a phone with one hand. One of its strong points is an enhanced multitasking system, which allows consumers to use more than one application at the same time by dividing the screen between apps. However, the markets say it's too early to tell whether the new innovation will succeed given its high price, which is around $2,000. The Galaxy Fold will also be available in 4G LTE when it's launched in other markets. Cho Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
And over in Berlin, both Samsung and LG are showcasing their latest gadgets in this year's IFA show, which opens on Friday. Our Oh Soo-young has a sneak peek.
It's all about bending the rules at this year's IFA, the world's biggest consumer electronics fair, with South Korean tech giants breaking the conventions of display technology.
What I find really interesting is the things that are new and only just coming into the shops, especially rollable and foldable displays. These devices will be very expensive, but they show the direction we're heading in.
Samsung's $2,000 foldable smartphone, the Galaxy Fold, is a major showstopper. featuring the world's first Infinity Flex display. There has been high anticipation around its launch after the initial release date was delayed by months due to screen defects, as well as Samsung's competition with Huawei in releasing the industry's first major foldable smartphone.
When Samsung's Galaxy Fold first broke cover in February, everyone was super excited about it, and all the technology enthusiasts wanted to go out and get one, despite the high price. I'm worried that perhaps now, given the delays, given the problems, people will be a little more nervous. However, when you get the product in your hand, I have to tell you, it does feel lovely, and it really is the ultimate kind of technology gadget bling on the market right now.
Meanwhile, LG is also showcasing a world's first, a 65-inch TV that can be rolled out of sight into a sleek box when not in use. The OLED model was first revealed at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2018 and is expected to go on sale later this year. The IFA show runs until next Wednesday. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And that does it for this hour. Thank you for watching.